As we mentioned, any issues with electricity can damage the hardware or the hardware components of the device, so I must ensure that the electricity remains stable at all times. If there is a power cut, I need to quickly respond to the system I have to prevent any impact on the components. Now, what are the work ideas? The principle is that inside the generator, I will find the X-ray tube, which is responsible for producing the X-rays. The patient will undergo absorption of the X-rays that fall on them, and a part of that will pass through. This part must be received by the detector. Therefore, my system consists of the X-ray. The X-ray tube produces X-rays, and the detector detects the X-rays that fall on it. Now, if I don't have a patient and I remove the patient from the image, what will happen? The X-rays will still be produced, but the detector will not receive any X-rays. So, what will the resulting image look like? The image will be completely black, with no details or features. Why did it appear black and not white? Simply put, if there is no exposure, or if the exposure remains very high, the signal translates to the image as black. So, to understand this, the signal I receive, or the intensity of the photons, or the intensity of the X-rays, when it comes to me strongly or with high intensity, must be represented in black. For example, in the image you see here, the gray color or the brown color represents details present in the image, while the surrounding area, what is that? It's the air. Why did it appear black here? Because the air did not absorb any type of radiation, so it appeared black. On the other hand, the white part absorbs a significant amount of radiation, so the intensity of the X-ray that reached it is low, thus it is represented in white. The brown color is in between, so the colors represent the intensities of the photons. If the intensity is high, it is represented in black, and if it is low, it is represented in white, while the shades in between are referred to as grayscale. The grayscale consists of various different shades, which I often refer to as distinct degrees. In this particular gradient, you will consistently find that the image in the CT scan invariably contains all the colors, including shades of black, gray, and white. For instance, in the image presented here, you can clearly see a bright area that distinctly represents the liver. This bright part unmistakably indicates that the sample is injected with a contrast agent, which effectively lights up the liver, making it appear vividly white. Now, if we closely examine this part of the spine, it absorbs a significant amount of X-rays because bone has a very high density. Therefore, it will prominently show up as white in the image due to the high intensity of the X-rays that pass through it being relatively low. On the other hand, this particular part here contains air, and this specific section comes from the stomach, which appears distinctly black because the air does not absorb any type of X-rays present. The absorption is weak, so the absorption of the radiation reaching the detector in this area is very high, which appears black. In other areas, it takes on a gray color, like here in the muscle tissue. The X-rays are absorbed, but not with the same intensity as in the spine, so they start to appear gray. Now look at how the contrast has brightened the capsule. It appears very bright because the contrast has high density. Thus it shows up white. What about the area outside? The ribs have the same high density, so they also appear white. Now see the cartilage that is visible between the ribs? As I'm pointing out, it has absorbed some X-rays, so it didn't appear white, but rather in gray. Thus, the variations in colors are related to this. It's similar to a regular X-ray image. In the regular X-ray image, as you can see here, the lung appears black because the lung does not have the ability to absorb the radiation. Consequently, a lot of strong X-rays pass through without any absorption, so they hit the detector, resulting in darkening and the color black. However, you can see that the spine is starting to appear white. Notice the ribs. These are the ribs that appear white. Therefore, the bone appears white, while the air appears black, with gradations in the grayscale in between. This represents what it looks like when I take a regular X-ray, which is called an X-ray, and this is a two-dimensional image. But the final image is a CT scan, as if I took a slice of the patient's body and displayed it this way. This is a cross-sectional image, similar to taking a picture with a mobile phone, but it provides more detailed views of the inside of the chest. Now let's talk about the structure of the gantry and see what's inside. Here is the CT gantry, and here is our washer. As we mentioned, we will find the internal components of the CT gantry. Number 1 is the X-ray tube, number 2 is the detector, and number 3 is for me. Number 3 is the tube controller that controls the movement of the tube. Number 4 is the tube controller, which is the generator. Number 5 is the tube controller, which is a computer that can control all the side components. So I have 1 X-ray tube, 2 the detector, 3 the tube controller that controls the movement of the tube. Number 4 is the tube controller, which is the generator located on the side. And number 5 is a computer that can control everything together. So what is number 6? Number 6 is a computer. Computer number 5 can connect to the computer located outside. Do you remember the computer that is outside? It is sitting there. How can it communicate with all the computers present in the gantry through computer number 6? Computer number 6 controls or connects between the computer located in 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 the computer. This is a cathode. On the other side, there is an anode and a cathode, which is a glass tube that is evacuated of air. This rotor performs the rotation of the anode, as we will understand later. When we talk about X-ray production from the inside, we find that there is an anode and a cathode. The anode serves as a target, while the cathode in the electrical circuit is represented by the filament. Now, what is its function? And what about the anode? The cathode in this electrical circuit that you see is the filament. The anode acts as the target, and the cathode is the filament. The filament is connected to an electric current, causing it to heat up. Does the filament heat up when it gets hot? It does. It causes the release of electrons beneath it in a process called thermo-ionic emission. When these electrons are released, what happens? They fall onto the anode. When they fall onto the anode, X-ray production occurs. Will these electrons burn themselves out from the cathode to the anode? No, the process requires a voltage difference. It needs high voltage to create a voltage difference between the cathode and the anode, which starts to accelerate and move the electrons. Consequently, X-ray production begins. The first thing you need to understand well when we talk about X-ray production is the electric current. Heat the filament to a certain degree. If you increase the milliampere, which represents the electric current that will flow in this circuit, then the milliampere is the control of the electric current. Increasing the milliampere value, for example, to 50 milliamperes, 100 milliamperes, 200 milliamperes, and so on, causes the filament to heat up to a higher degree. So when the filament heats up more, the number of electrons that will be released from the filament will be higher. This is logical. Well, the number of electrons that will be released in a larger quantity when they fall onto the anode. There will be an increase in the likelihood of interaction between the electron and the anode. Right? Right. So, the number of photons or the number of X-rays that will come out of the anode will be more. Therefore, the milliampere is the first factor you need to keep in mind as it controls the X-ray or affects the process of X-ray production. When the value of the milliampere increases, the filament increases the number of electrons, which in turn increases the number of electrons, which in turn increases the number of electrons, which in turn increases the number of electrons. The text provides a detailed discussion about the number of periods, examining their calculation methods and significance in various contexts. This exploration aims to offer a comprehensive understanding of the subject, ensuring readers are well informed about the nuances involved. We mentioned that there is a factor called high voltage or power supply. What does this high voltage do? It creates acceleration that moves the electrons from the filament to the target. If we say that this high voltage is 80 kilovolts, then this acceleration has a specific value. If I increase it to 120, will I increase the acceleration or not? Because it increases the voltage difference, the electrons will move faster. Therefore, the X-ray produced will have a higher penetration power inside the patient's body. The tube controller in your device controls the electrons. So what will ultimately happen to him? He will be higher in the body. In the body, there is another factor that will be discussed, which is very important in relation to electrons. Which device is telling you what you're working on? Is it 80, 100, or 120? So, at 140 volts, you can control the penetration power of the X-ray. Not only does this affect the penetration power of the X-ray, but it also influences the number of photons or the number of electrons that will undergo a dose. Therefore, the voltage here controls two things. It controls the penetration power and also what will happen to it. The higher you increase the voltage, the more you control the penetration strength, and it increases. You might ask yourself why to increase it, because when you provide higher energy to the electrons to move, you increase the probability of interactions that would occur. The interaction probability allows you to reach the nucleus of the atom and produce the primary X-ray, as we will discuss later about X-ray production and the probabilities that occur with X-rays. It is worth noting that 99% of the collisions that occur between the electrons coming from the filament and the anode result in heat. 1% of the X-ray is produced, meaning a large part of the collagen that occurs is released as heat. Yes, it is released as heat. That's why if we look at the previous image, I told you there is something here called the rotator. The function of the rotator is to rotate the anode. Why does it need to rotate? To ensure that the collisions between the electrons coming from the filament and heading to the anode happen in different locations each time. This way, it generates heat as if it is distributing the heat across the anode itself. This heat distribution prevents my anode from heating up too quickly. Now, when I talk about X-ray production, the electron coming from this filament will interact. It will either produce a characteristic X-ray. Now, let's talk about Bremsstrahlung X-ray, which is also known as braking radiation. The first type, which is important to us, is Bremsstrahlung X-ray, where the electron interacts with the Coulomb field around the target anode nucleus and gets deflected from its path, as you can see here with the blue line indicating the deviation from its trajectory, resulting in the emission of a photon. This photon is referred to as Bremsstrahlung X-ray, or the X-ray photon. Now, if we look at the KV, the external KV, you will find a spectrum that resembles this peak. This means that it interacts with the electrons in the K shell. What does characteristic mean? When an electron falls, it does not interact with the Coulomb field of the nucleus, but rather interacts with the electrons present in the shell. If it interacts with an electron, it results in the ejection of an electron from the K shell. The essence of what surrounds the nucleus causes it to eject an electron from its core, creating a gap. This results in a difference in energy or the transition of an electron from a higher orbit to a lower one, producing the X-ray, which I call characteristic X-ray. What I mean is the characteristic X-rays. So what do I rely on in the imaging process? I rely on Bremsstrahlung X-rays, not on characteristic X-rays. Now look here at the different kV settings you are using, 20, 30, 40, 50. There is a relationship between the wavelength and the intensity of the X-rays. When I used 20 kV, the spectrum was very small. After that, the spectrum increased. What does it mean that the spectrum increased? It means the intensity increased. You see, the intensity is continuously rising with the increase in kV, which means what happened to the number of photons? It increased. This is a very important point. You need to understand that kV also changes the number of photons of X-ray. This spectrum represents the emitted X-ray. When I performed the production, I used kV 120 and kV 50. You should know that the maximum energy of a photon that will come out of the tube will carry 50 kilovolts. Therefore, when you set it to 50 kilovolts, I need to know that I will be working here, and a spectrum of photons will appear, not just a single energy. This means that not all the external X-rays from the tube will carry the same energy. Rather, they will carry a spectrum ranging from low energy to high energy. The high energy value corresponds to the kV that I set. If I set it to 50, the highest photon energy will be 50. If I set it to 120, the highest photon energy will be 120, and so on. Now, what will you find in the spectrum? Here is the spectrum. Do most of the photons remain gathered, or do most of the photons lose energy? Do they lose high energy or initial energy? No, they lose energy in the middle, and they lose what is called the maximum wavelength. So when you want to know how much energy the outgoing photons carry, you need to consider the maximum wavelength for you. The maximum wavelength means you used 120, or for example, 80 kV. What is the corresponding wavelength for that? So what is the wavelength for that? Wavelength for